Alrighty. Alrighty. Um, Today, 21st of April, day 64. I actually ended up not doing another video yesterday. I was going to maybe do a quick show and tell to record for posterity's sake my planter bench and my planters, but I ended up not doing that for some reason. I'm going to go ahead and list that as laziness, which was a symptom yesterday that made me feel pretty unhappy by the end of the day. And I guess the thing that I observed was that I was lazy yesterday and I didn't feel good about how little I got done. Like I got everything that was required of me bare minimum. But I could have done more work, and I could have done more with recording what I did out there, so that I could at least have a record of it for myself. So if they do end up taking, if those cuttings end up going, I'll have a starting point for them, which would be, pretty nice. However, it snowed last night. Oh, the timing couldn't be worse. It snowed last night. We've had 60 to 70 degree days for the last couple of weeks, or at least the last week anyway. There's been a couple of cold-ish days, but like not cold enough to where you couldn't wear shorts and a t-shirt and still be somewhat comfortable. And we had, yesterday was even a warm day. And then overnight we got like 4 inches of snow. Not enough temperature-wise to stick to the roads or make a lot of ice, but certainly enough to pack on top of everything. So when I got up, my planters were covered. And I saw that it was going to snow. So I guess technically it's on me for not taking better caution and pushing for, or not pushing for, looking into what the weather was going to do. I should have researched it better. Again, laziness. Yeah, so as a result, I'm not sure how the cuttings are going to respond to that. They have covers. There's like little domes over the top of them at the moment, and I'm not expecting them to grow per se. At this stage, from what I understand with cuttings, is once you cut them off and heal them in, they look to root first and then start to grow. So as they stand for the next couple of months, assuming that we don't have a return to actual wintry conditions and wintry coldness, if that ends up being the case, if it ends up being 30 degrees all week this week, then I'll likely move them inside and manage them inside. But for now, I'm leaving them outside with the intent of it, with hopefully the weather turning around in a couple of days and us going back to 60, 70 degrees and lots of sun. But I guess we'll see how that goes. But like I said, there was a feeling of mopiness at the end of the day, and I couldn't attribute it to drugs. And it wasn't a pill day. It wasn't a Clomid pill day, so I couldn't say for sure if it was that sort of moodiness that I get when I've taken Clomid. Sometimes I end up a little more moody than normal. But when I thought about the day, I thought mostly how I hadn't accomplished everything that I'd set out to accomplish, and how I have been lazy in some of the things that I choose to do. So I made a couple of notes about that. I actually wrote up on the fridge with regards to my writing, not to be worried about quality writing. I think my visit with John, when I talked to him, and because he's naturally a very critical person, and because he's so enthusiastic about his criticism, is that I think probably one of the areas that he would need to help himself a little bit, or need help from people, is to remember to be less critical. Not less critical necessarily, but overall in the whole context, like in the whole sort of package that he is, being less critical would help him a lot, I think, and how he's perceived socially. But I think when I explained a chapter that I'd written about the book about the science, the very basic science of dopamine and how THC interacts with dopamine in the brain, and how I believe that that's one of the reasons why it's habit forming, or why it can be habit forming. He kind of shut me down, and I've talked about that where I'm not a scientist, so for me to make scientific statements like that is a little bit unqualified, or a lot unqualified. But going back over it, one of the people who read it actually said they really liked it. They liked that chapter because it was scientific enough to get the point across without lying about it or being speculative, but it was not scientific enough to be boring or difficult to follow. And that was kind of my point, was that I was looking to try to give people an understanding of why they've built a habit around using marijuana. And my Aussie friend, in his fashion, was quick to point out that there's a lot of other factors that are tied up in that. But for me, and in my experience, a lot of those other factors didn't really play into it because it was me doing it by myself. And a lot of addicts are in that position. They're in the position of doing drugs by themselves. So to say that it's a social thing, or to say that there's a cultural aspect to it, and that it's not just the dopamine internal mechanism, I think there are people who are more susceptible to it, to the internal mechanism. But again, not being a scientist and not having any studies or anything to prove that point, I had to go back and trim a lot of the speculative stuff out of that chapter and make it very specifically about what it is. So I've decided to compromise with that. But the follow-on effect from that is that when I'm writing the second book, and I'm writing stuff that's just not good quality, and it's because I'm distracted, honestly. I'm distracted thinking about the other book and waiting to get the proofs back from someone who's doing some editing for me, and I'm distracted by that, and I'm also distracted because I'm not really focusing on the book at the moment, and I needed to remind myself that when it comes to art, when it comes to writing, when it comes to anything that you're doing that's creative, you have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And the reason for that is that if you get out of the habit of just creating, even if it's crap, you stop devoting the time to it. And it's like with gold mining. You don't go out and gold mine and expect to strike a vein on the first time you do it, or the second, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth. What you expect to do is clear an area of dirt and investigate to try to see if there's any vein in there, if there's any leads on where the gold could be. And that's what you're doing when you're writing. I feel like you're writing a bunch to look through it and find the stuff that's useful. And then eventually you'll go back and trim out a lot of the fat, the stuff that you might have thought was really good. But that in the context of the book, how it turns out, actually ends up being poop. So that's what I've decided to focus on now, is in these morning sessions after my videos are done, is just to write. And just to keep writing and not worry too much about the quality of it. And then later on, when I go back, after I've gotten around to publishing the first book, then I can come back to this book and I'll have a bunch of material to work with. And that's where I would like to be with that. I guess I'll wrap up with a quick, my thoughts on what's happened in Minnesota. And when I say quick, I mean really quick. I think there should probably have been a mistrial declared, and it should have been reset and moved out of Minnesota. I think jurors should have been picked from outside of the state. I think they should have been sequestered. I don't think it should have been publicly broadcast. I think it should have been held in closed space for the world to not see or influence. I think even people like the president and congresswomen and other people who have essentially put political pressure on the process, I think that should be taken into account when it's declared a mistrial. I don't have any issue with a jury finding the man guilty of what it is that they've found him guilty of, but it's hard for me to accept that it was impartial and that it was fair and that individual justice was done on that day. To me, it felt like cultural pressures and political and social pressures affected the outcome of that trial, and that is not individual justice. I would ask anyone who's watching, if you were in his shoes, would you think that you had had a fair trial? Or would you think that a lot of people had already determined that you were guilty based on what the media has said and purposefully left out from what they've said? I don't think you would. I think you would feel hard done by. I mean, obviously you'd probably feel that because you'd lost your defense, but I think there was simply too much politics and too much social pressure involved in this to call it a fair and an unbiased trial. And I think that alone is enough of a reason for it to be declared a mistrial and for it to be moved to a higher court somewhere else. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm just gonna go past it. I didn't care too much about the OJ verdict because I when I was a kid I didn't pay any attention to that sort of shit. I care a little bit about this one because I feel like it's going to be another one of those. It's another rung on the ladder down into our division of society. I don't think it's going to help at all that he's been convicted of this crime. I don't think it's going to change anything. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. Continue on. Good luck, those of you with your quitting. It's been working for me, and I hope it's been working for you guys. Ka kite.